Welcome to the Cinema Dive. My name is Nathan, and today we're diving into the classic 1999's The Blair Witch Project.
I'm so scared.
We're going to dive into one of the most influential found footage movies out there. And whether you like it or whether you hate it, you can't deny what it did to change the film industry. For me, this is one of my favorite horror movies. In fact, I remember as a 10-year-old boy sneaking into the theater with my friends to see this since we were underage. And then I remembered how terrified I was as that 10-year-old boy. Now, is The Blair Witch Project the first found footage film out there? No, of course not. In fact, most believe that the 1980s Cannibal Holocaust was, and that's actually an interesting movie, and I really want to dive into that one of these days, because that is going to be a bizarre one. As I said, the Blair Witch Project is kind of the most influential one. It kind of changed how we saw found footage filming, and it did a lot of things that kind of changed movies overall. And this definitely paved the way for films like Paranormal Activity, which is also standing on its own as one of the great found footage movies that are out there at the time. And in case you haven't dived into any of your streaming platforms, there is now a plethora of found footage films, both good and mostly bad out there. Now, eventually I do want to devote an entire video to the genre of found footage documentary or found footage films because I find them fascinating, and they populate mostly horror. I haven't really seen any found footage films that lie outside of it, but I assume there's some. But I think the video on the Blair Witch will kind of cover a lot of the key aspects of what makes found footage possibly a good way to go into a horror movie, if it's done right. It kind of seems that it's harder for people to act like they're not acting than it is for them to act like they're somebody completely different. Now, just like before we go into any deep dives on this or any spoiler territory, I'll give you a quick synopsis of the film to the best of my abilities for those of you who may have not seen this and have been living under a rock since 1999. The premise is 3 film students decide that they want to make a documentary on a myth called the Blair Witch. For this, they go off to the town of Burkittsville, Maryland, to interview a bunch of people about the Blair Witch to find out more about the myth and some of the strange occurrences that supposedly have happened in this area. They then head out the woods to find a couple points of interest that the town folks have told them that they can go and see. And as tensions build between them due to getting lost and being out in the woods just stresses people out, strange occurrences start happening. The movie has a bit of a slow burn for the first 30 minutes, but then the paranormal and creepy stuff starts to happen, and the movie escalates very quickly from that point on. Of course, the trailer itself basically already gives a big spoiler, basically letting you know that obviously these 3 people don't make it through the movie, or they at least go missing, and that whatever happens terrifies them greatly. Now, beyond that, I can't really tell you much more without giving details, and details equals spoilers. But what I'll say to you is if you haven't seen this movie, stop this video, go watch it, come back. If you have seen this movie, watch this, and then go watch the movie again. And if you've seen it multiple times, go watch it again. It's Halloween time, people. Go get out there. So now it's time for our dive into the synopsis and the production of the film. So right here, if you haven't seen it, stop it. If you want to ignore it and just get the cliff notes like before, sit around. Spoiler time! So of the 3 film students, Heather is the one leading the project and is actually her project for school, and she's going to be directing the entire documentary.
This is my home.
Okay. Wow.
Which I am leaving the comforts of for the weekend to explore the Blair Witch.
As I say before, they travel to Burkittsville to get some documentation with some of the people in town who can tell the story of the Blair Witch a lot better. Then, as I said in the pre-synopsis, they head out into the woods to go check out points of interest. One is called Coffin Rock, where apparently a bunch of people were found mutilated by somebody. Later, when they came back with authorities, the bodies were gone, with only blood there left to remain.
Often referred to as Coffin Rock. On top of the rock formation, the story of the torture inflicted upon these brave 5 men unfolded. Each was bound. In the torso of each man, the intestines had been torn out crudely. On each man's sun-bleached face was inscribed in decipherable writing, cut into their flesh with an eerie precision. Upon return, vultures were seen at the rock. But upon inspection, the bodies had been removed by persons unknown.
They also hear of a story of a cemetery out in the woods marked by just piles of rocks that they decide to go and find as well. Heather acts as a very stubborn and persistent person. She's directing this, she's leading this, she doesn't want to seem like she doesn't know what she's doing, so she's the one in charge of the map and the compass. And eventually, this starts making her fellow filmmakers turn on her a little bit.
I'm not playing head games, man. If anyone's playing head games, you're playing head games, but I'm not playing head games.
In fact, the main theme of the movie is that they're going around thinking that they're lost. Now, pretty soon, spooky things start happening. They hear noises in the woods, cracking tree branches and rocks being thrown. And at first, they pass this off as, oh yeah, we interviewed all those locals. They're just messing with us now. But this thought terrifies them too. They're deep in the woods. Who's going to come out there to mess with them? They got to be unstable as well. Pretty soon, the night harassment starts off even worse. They start hearing children playing at the woods at night, which terrifies all of them. Then in one scene, their tent gets violently shaken by something that sends them all running out into the darkness to just find a refuge for the night.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Let me get my jeans on. I'm coming!
Eventually, the harassment gets so bad that they decide that each night they're going to do a rotation of everybody, and someone's going to be on watch to keep everyone privy to what might be going on. The next morning after this, though, one of their members goes missing. Josh is no longer with them. They search for him to no avail for that day and decide that they're going to keep on moving because they're trying to get out of a bad situation at this point. That night, they start hearing screams of pain and Josh yelling for help. They keep calling back to him, but he never is able to actually respond to tell them where he's at, so they have to sit in terror while they hear him basically sounding like he's being tortured.
Josh! Josh!
Josh! Josh! Josh! Josh, where are you? Tell me where you are!
That next morning, Heather's the first one up, goes outside the tent, and finds a bundle of sticks that's been tied together with shreds of Josh's shirt, now coated in blood. When she finally opens it, she finds a little pouch full of blood, teeth, and a piece of Josh's scalp. Now, she doesn't tell Mike this, obviously. She doesn't need him freaking out any more than he already is. Then finally the movie climaxes. One night they hear Josh calling and yelling help for them. However, the suspicion of whether or not this is Josh is getting to Heather. But Mike seems insistent he wants to find him, and whether he believes it's really him or whether he's just so broken mentally that he just is trying to find their lost friend is hard to tell. Josh's yells brings them to a house deep in the woods. Heather doesn't want anything to do with it, but Mike's insistent that they're going to find Josh inside. They move throughout the entire house trying to find Josh. Finally, hearing him in the basement, Mike runs down. Mike's yelling for Josh, and all of a sudden, he stops making noise and the camera falls to the ground. Next, Heather, using the 16mm camera, which has no sound on it itself, ventures down into the basement. Now, in case you're wondering, they're using the cameras at this point as flashlights. When she gets down to the basement, she's yelling for Mike, then turns to see him standing in the corner, facing the corner, and then her audio is cut off, and her camera drops to the ground. Roll credits. That's it. You've seen it. I've seen it. We know what happens. If you sat through this and you've never seen it and you're like, that's it, I know the synopsis doesn't sound great in that aspect. The movie itself is kind of a slow burn overall, but the first impression of actually watching the movie is a lot different than what I can even explain it as. So let's break down this movie a little bit further and look into the actual production that went behind it. So like I said, we begin the movie with 3 film students, one named Heather Donahue, one named Joshua Leonard, and one named Mike Williams. And they're played by the actors Heather Donahue, Josh Leonard, and Mike Williams. That's right, they used their real name This was all part of the filmmaker's way of trying to send an authenticity notice with you in this film. So the first thing they did was they looked for actors who were A, not known, and B, were good at improv. And their biggest goal was to keep everything as hush about the film as possible. So these 3 actors actually signed a waiver that basically said that they would stay out of the media and any other projects till film's release. Now that may not sound super big, but this movie was filmed in 97 and wasn't released till 99. That's 2 years of them not being able to do any work because they signed this disclosure on this. But that, along with the campaign that they launched to start a website based off of the Blair Witch, and that kind of drove home the myth that the filmmakers made up. Because the Blair Witch is not a real myth. It's something that they created in order to do this. However, the actors were not aware of that. According to what they were told, the filmmakers said, yeah, this is a real myth about this area. In fact, to the point where the actual people that they talked to in the town were Planet actors that were told what to say about the Blair Witch. This means that the actors were being tricked by the filmmakers while they were trying to act. This whole thing kind of compounded it and gave that little edge of fear to the actors, like, oh, that's a real myth. This also makes everything seem a bit more dire when they're doing everything themselves, because it was basically up to the 3 actors to do all the filming and all their stuff by themselves. There were crew obviously involved with the film. Obviously someone had to shake their tent, someone had to be making all the noises out in the woods, but for the most part it was just them 3, and the filmmakers actually tried to keep distance so that they didn't see the crew all the time, so that they would film more alone in the woods. On top of that, the filmmakers made them sign a waiver that allowed the filmmakers to, quote, mess with their heads. How does this thing take place? First off, the scene where the tents actually shake, that was not in their script or was not in their outline. So the actors were actually scared by that.
Oh, dear. Oh, dear. Go, fucking go!
They actually got lost 3 separate occasions for real. In fact, there's a scene in the movie where they end up back in the same spot that they were just at. And that was genuine. And the reaction to that was also genuine.
No, that's the tree we crossed. That tree is down. That's the same one. Oh, God!
No. Oh, no.
You gotta be kidding me! This is a joke!
See, the film didn't have a proper script. It had a 35-page outline of what was to take place. But for all the lines, it was meant to be improv. Each day, the actors had a GPS that took them to a geocache kind of like location where they had instructions for each character on them. Each person was not supposed to tell or show what was in store for their character to the other actors to keep the realisticness of this alive.
We got out into the woods. They gave us a global positioning system, which is never seen on camera. They would program these waypoints in there, and we would basically just follow the little arrows that would pop up on the screen of the global positioning system, because there would be a white milk crate with an orange bicycle flag sticking out of it. And then we would go up to the little milk crate, and inside would be these little film containers like you use for 35mm stuff,
Right.
the little plastic things that you throw away before you get them developed. There would be our initials on each one. We were only allowed to look at our instructions. We weren't allowed to show them to each other. And then for the next, say, 2, 3, 4 hours, we would just follow that direction until we hit the next waypoint where we would get further instructions.
Having them keep secrets from each other, they also reduced the amount of food they were given each day, and of course the tormenting from the filmmakers of the stuff that wasn't scripted, and the time spent in the woods all took mental stress on all these actors and built real tensions between them. So when you look at the beginning, you might say, oh, this acting's a little cheesy. But when they fight with each other, when they're yelling at each other, when they're scared and terrified, those scenes seem so much more authentic because the filmmakers kind of drove them into those moods. Now, the filming of this movie took 8 days to film. Now, I don't know about most of you, but I've spent about a week, 2 weeks alone in the woods before, and it can be quite trying. Now, doing that with other people is even more. People might think it's the opposite, but really, when you're by yourself, you're in control of everything you do and everything that happens to you. When you're with other people, you have to rely that someone else is making a decision that might impact you. This puts a lot of stress on people, and often tensions arise. Towards the last few scenes, all the actors are strained, they're stressed. They're also dealing with the fact that they have been in the woods for many, many days with people they barely know. And in one of the climactic scenes where they're running away in the middle of the dark, one of the filmmakers actually dressed up all in white to kind of look like the Blair Witch. And there's a scene where Heather's running and she literally turns to her left and says, "What the F is that?" And that was a genuine response to that and genuine fear from it because she was not expecting any of this.
I'm coming! My boots aren't laced! Oh my god, what the fuck is that? What the fuck is that?
The filmmakers took not only us for a ride, but took the actors for a ride, which gave us that kind of extra authenticity to make this seem more real than some of the spawns of found footage movies that have come afterwards. I don't know if you're an aspiring actor out there, but I know that under the stresses that they were going through with being really lost, being out in the woods, being with strangers, dealing with low-level food, being messed with, all that, and still being able to improv all their lines, that's not an easy task, and my theoretical hat goes off to them. Now, in the actual outline, they had scenes where they were going to show glimpses of the Blair Witch. When they tried to put these scenes together, they never worked out very authentically, so they just left them out even of the Sundance version. But simply put, I think this actually benefits the movie in not seeing the actual Blair Witch. It relies much more on the audience's imagination. For me, this is akin to Lovecraftian type of writing, where he does give a description of these creatures or entities or gods, and yet at the same time he describes them as being indescribable, leaving it up to the reader's imagination to fill in the blanks. And as far as it goes, I think a lot of people's imaginations go beyond what CGI or special effects can create, therefore making some of this a little bit more scary than it really is. As I said before, the overall brilliance of this movie was the campaign to make as many people believe this myth was real as possible, and to make people believe that these actors were the real people in this documentary and actually went missing. The whole idea was to make it real. Granted, if you really think about it, if this footage was ever real, or any footage like this was ever real, do you think the families of those people would ever want this footage out? Seems a little morbid to just be like, hey, yeah, let's make some money off of our family members' last days on the planet. But I don't think any movie has gone as far to take it as seriously as The Blair Witch did. The first Paranormal Activity did really well, with the end credits going and thanking the family of the victims for sharing the footage, and then waiting with a black screen for a good chunk of time before it actually got to real credits to kind of make people sit in the theaters going, was that real? Because just for a moment, they want us to think it is. Now, the movie was enormously successful. No matter how many people go off and make fun of it, no matter how many people have done parodies of it, it was a $60,000 budget movie. And it grossed at the box office $248 million. This holds a Guinness Book of World Records, the category of the top budget box office ratio. What that means is that for what they spent, they made a ratio much greater than any other movie. For every dollar spent on this film, $11,000 was made. That's huge. Now, originally released at Sundance Film Festival and was sat in about 2.5 hours long, the actual final cut sits more about 90 minutes. Now, if you actually have the DVD version of the movie, go look at your special features, you should have quite a lot of the cut scenes from the Sundance version. However, I don't think you're missing out not seeing the Sundance version. I think 2.5 hours would have been too long for this to be in theaters. 90 minutes is great for a very fast-paced horror movie like this. It gets you in and gets you out without a lot of excess footage, like a lot of these films nowadays seem to have. Plus the setup overall. It's 3 filmmakers, and one of them's kind of obsessed with making her film, which makes more sense why she's filming everything that she can, even the bad situations.
Can't believe we have to leave just when shit's happening.
Heather, put the fucking camera down. Let's pack up the tent. Let's get
Okay, hang on.
okay?
Whereas that doesn't always make sense in today's found footage films, but then again, everyone has a smartphone, everyone's filming everything like all the time. I'm impressed by seeing what people are actually capturing on footage in real life. But overall, I think modern day found footage movies film too much. There's just too much excess footage and not enough of what we're trying to accomplish with the horror aspect. Not to mention, like I said before, a lot of the acting in found footage movies is hysterically bad. I mean, some people might have a problem with the acting in this film, but I think this acting, like I said, at the beginning is a little cheese, but gets more real, more tension builds. I think the other ones didn't have the same effect because the filmmakers didn't understand that they needed to put their people into situations that drove real emotions rather than trying to have them act. Because obviously, if you're not an actor, you're gonna act badly, probably. Now, as far as found footage movies, I mean, you can't do better than being lost in the woods. It's super cheap to film out there. It's really easy. The woods already have that kind of ominous scariness that a lot of people get from that, especially at night in the woods. A lot of noises go on and people's imaginations run wild. I mean, the only props really made for this film were the numerous stick figures that were meant to scare them, the piles of rocks that symbolized grave markers, and the 3 left outside their tents to basically say, hey, all 3 of you are going to die. And of course, the bundle that she finds with the teeth and scalp in it, and blood. Not to mention the way she filmed it. I don't know how other people would have handled this, but I like the fact that the moment she opens it up, she freaks out and takes it away. But at the same time, she goes, I need to have this filmed and recorded just in case we make it out of here so I can show what's happened. But she doesn't like dig through it to try and show you to you, and because it's such a low quality camera compared to nowadays, you can't quite tell what it is. You can see hair, you can see blood, you just know it's not good, and it gives you that indication that something bad happened to Josh.
It's all full of blood.
Now, one of the more unique things about this movie was it filmed on 2 separate cameras. One of them was a high-8 camcorder, just a good old classic VHS camcorder. Now, the one my family had back in like the 80s was a big, huge shoulder-mounted one. You stuck a VHS tape in. This was handheld, a little bit more compact, but still very antiquated compared to nowadays stuff. The second camera was a CP 16mm camera. It's a real camera, and I mean real as in it uses a reel of film, and it was shot in black and white. The interesting thing about this camera is there's no audio capture on it, and though they actually had a separate audio capture device for it. This is kind of that artsy film student way of making a documentary look more classic and a little bit more stylized. Now, this actually adds a very unique behavior to it because without sound recording for the 16mm, the only sound that we would get is from the high-8 camcorder. And in fact, in the last scene where they're running into the house, they don't have the sound system recording for the 16mm. So the only thing they got is they have the 2 cameras running for flashlights, and the only sound being recorded is from the high-8. This makes the disconnect between Heather's voice and her footage that she's shooting on the 16mm distanced. And I honestly think it's a cool effect, because the best scene is right after Mike gets taken out or whatever, and his camera's lying on the ground. It goes back to Heather going through the house with the black and white camcorder, and she's calling out for Mike. But it's in a distance, so it has a very creepy effect to it. The immediate response to this film was actually a lot of people believing it was the real deal. In fact, Heather's real mother received a ton of sympathy cards in the mail saying that they felt sorry for the loss of her daughter. That's gotta be a bizarre thing to have happen, right? In fact, the film became such a cult classic and such a hit among so many people that the town of Burkittsville has actually had problems with vandalism and like their sign being stolen a whole bunch and people just tromping through their woods. Now, as far as the Blair Witch legacy, there were 2 movies made afterwards. One was Blair Witch 2, Book of Shadows or something like that. I don't remember quite the whole story of it. It's not done in a documentary style like the original was. It was done more movie-esque, but I do remember it being absolute garbage. Then in 2016, they did make a direct sequel to it that basically follows Heather's younger brother finding additional footage and then going out after her with his friends and the whole debacle. I have seen this one, but I do not remember it in detail. It's probably one I'm going to go watch, and then in the future we'll have a video on the Blair Witch 2016. Now, let's just go ahead and sum everything up. I still stand by saying this is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. In fact, I would put it in like my top 20 all-time favorite movies. I know most top 20 or top 5 and everything usually has about 100 different top 20s in it, but it's definitely up there. I enjoy watching it. I think it stands strong as a horror film, and I think it really does give us something new when it came to found footage, and inspired so many others to take that same route. I think the whole setup, you put a bunch of people in the woods who are technically supposed to improv an entire movie while exposing them to the stress of just being out in the wilderness, the stress of being messed with by the filmmakers, and the stress of not getting enough food and being lost in the woods. All this combos to make just for a really effective film, I think. I enjoy the fact that this movie pushes an audience to use their imagination a lot more. Kind of like we used to when we used to all read all the time. It seems less and less that imagination is a powerful tool for most people. So when a movie like this is out, or any movie that, puts it up to you to kind of fill in the blanks, I really actually enjoy that aspect, and it drove home that fear factor a little bit better for me. Of course, with modern generation, this movie might seem lackluster. There literally is nothing that you see besides the actors themselves and a couple of trinkets hung in a tree. You never see the Blair Witch. You never see these invisible children. You never see anything really besides kind of what would be caught on an actual, maybe found footage. But once again, keeping the Blair Witch off screen, I think, drives home. A lot of times when you watch a horror movie that has a hidden villain or a hidden evil, and all of a sudden you give it a face, it loses its value. It loses its fear factor when you give it a face. And I still stand by the fact that if this movie had never been made, things like Paranormal Activity may not have been made themselves, and if they had, they probably wouldn't have had the popularity that they enjoyed being made. And I certainly don't think we would see the plethora of found footage horror movies that we do see nowadays. So if you haven't watched this movie and you watched this, still go watch it. It's such a good movie. It's so well done. The atmosphere they create, the tension they feel, it really makes you feel that, and maybe it might drive up some people's anxiety a little bit, but that's kind of what horror movies are supposed to do. Plus, this would be perfect to watch on Halloween, as the last day of filming actually took place on Halloween. They thought it was kind of surreal how they came out of the woods filming a horror movie to come see everybody in town in costume. And I'll stop gushing about this movie. I absolutely do love it. I think anyone who goes and watches it and truly takes in what it is will enjoy it as well. And thank you so much for watching this. Definitely go check out the other videos I have. Slowly building up a back catalog of them, but right now I'm proud of what I have released. Definitely get in the comment field. Let me know suggestions you have for the channel, suggestions you might have of videos, movies that you want to see me go into deep dives on. Hit that like, hit that subscribe for helping out the channel. Once again, have a wonderful day.